started. All right, so yeah, welcome everyone again. Welcome to this webinar that's commemorating the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. So this is Hector speaking from Accountable Now. And just to give you a very quick background on why we are hosting this event is just because Dumi, who is going to be your moderator today, is sitting on Accountable Now board. Very kindly, they have suggested that we host an event like that, and also from us recognizing that our members and ourselves as the Secretariat, we haven't done much. We haven't really share much resources on the theme, so we are very happy to be hosting this today. So I'm gonna just very quickly introduce Dumi. Dumi is a proudly Pan-African and equivocally non-binary queer feminist working on eliminating the barriers between grassroots experiences and global policymaking. Dumi is founder of Success Capital Organization, a queer youth, migrant, ethnic minority, feminist-led, managed and serving grassroots organizations, challenging power, privilege, and patriarchy, impeding the colonial climate, health, gender, and socioeconomic justice. And Dumi is also a facilitator of the Shift the Power UK Funders Collective, critical friend of the CIVICUS War Alliance Resourcing Workstream, a standing international member representative of Amnesty International, and a board member of Accountable Now and Gender Dynamics, along with an advisory council member of the Youth Excel. So with this, over to you, Dumi, to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hector. And again, apologies to everyone for a late start, but I think also it's just recognizing that so much busy in an increasingly opening up a world with eases around the COVID pandemic. We all are contributing in some way to this important day. That being said, I must extend apologies for the of Gender Dynamics, Liberty, who unfortunately would not be able to make it, but also, as I understand, Matthew Blaze would be in transit. And I think it's also just safe as a caveat to say, please do, thank you, Kashindi, for introducing yourself. Please do introduce yourself on the chat. Let us know. Cold. It'll be good to know, or just to get a sense in the room where everyone is. And then also just, to give a disclaimer around Alex having to use himself having been in travel. So that being said, I'd like to welcome Wima. Thank you so much for joining, and Alex, but then also Mawetu, who we got a little bit of an introduction with the background noise. And then hopefully one of our colleagues from Eswatini will share some insight, if they would be kind enough to do so when I do call. But thank you so much. And so I think we should start with introduction, given the change in our lineup. So that means we have to throw away the script a bit. And so, of course, as usual, in many speaking engagements where we've collaborated, I will start with Alex. Please do introduce yourself and maybe just highlight why it's important to commemorate IDAHOBIT in 2022. Alex?
Thank you so much, Dumi, and hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Alex Kofi Donkor, and I am the director for LGBT Rights Ghana. And just like the name mentions, so it means I'm also located in Ghana, but at the moment I'm in travel, so yeah. Why is Idaho important? I think the need to commemorate Idaho and also continuously celebrate Idaho is because when it comes to violence and discrimination and abuses that the LGBTQ community experience, it hasn't reduced or even eliminated as we wish it would. And for that matter, we need to constantly and continuously remind ourselves of these phobias that are targeted at the already vulnerable community, the already marginalized community, and to remind various institutions and power holders of their roles and their responsibility towards their citizens, especially gender and sexual diversity or diverse citizens within their country. And when I try to limit it to a place like Ghana, I would say that the hostility towards the LGBT community is rather increased. We are in a time and in a moment where freedoms and the liberation of the LGBTQ community is rather being closed down by oppressive groups, by anti-LGBT groups, by powerful institutions like religious groups, the political groups, the media, opinion and traditional leaders, all of these institutions that are very powerful and have resources and privileges way above and beyond our imagination, teaming up and really pushing back against the LGBTQ community. And moments like Idaho is those times where we reflect on these institutions who constantly, instead of rather protecting and supporting and respecting the rights of LGBTQ persons, are rather pushing draconian and inhumane bills and treatment towards the community. And days like this are days that we reflect on them and remind them of their accountability to all of their citizens, including the LGBTQ community, and ask that they do better and act right towards all of their citizens, especially LGBTQ community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. And I think, speaking to the invisible aspects of power, structural violence, various violence is really quite important. And I love the fact that you just, it wasn't just about commemorating, it's also about celebrating. And so I'm hoping that we can have some queer joy sort of in the very challenging context we've had coming out of the hardest parts of the lockdown. We'll then next turn to Wima. Please do just introduce yourself and let us know why it's important for us to commemorate IDAHOBIT.
Oh, hi, my name is Wima. I'm a non-binary queer activist from Tunisia. I work with a Tunisian organization here called the Initiative Mawjoudin for Equality, which works with minorities, but with a very special focus on the LGBTQ community in the country, regardless if they're Tunisians or non-Tunisians. So I think I got a bit lost with what Alex was telling, and I also thought that maybe we should also think about the celebration part. I know someone would say, how can you celebrate IDAHOBIT in a country or in a continent where being part of the community is still illegal, is still considered a crime? But I think we could at least celebrate the fact that we exist, celebrate the fact that we could speak up, the fact that we have these kind of panels where many people, many activists from all around could come together and share their experiences, and having people asking questions, at least in a semi-safe place, if I could say. So let's at least celebrate the efforts that people, the generations before us have been doing. Let's celebrate the effort that we are doing as well here, and celebrate the future. Why not? That maybe in the upcoming years, I would say maybe 5 to 10 years, we wouldn't have to talk about oppression and about police brutality and about all these stupid law, if I could call them, that we have to deal with today. So yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Wima, stressing the importance of acknowledging some of the milestones and the gains that we're making. And I think that's really quite important. I think it really is quite reflective of not just the African context, but our lives, in that they're multidimensional, and that, in as much as there's a lot of resilience, still a lot of joy and pleasure. That being said, I would like to extend the platform to Mawethu. Mawethu, please do introduce yourself and let us know why it's important to commemorate IDAHOBIT. Mawethu?
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me in the platform. I'd explained a bit earlier why I'm not going to be able to switch on my camera. I think, IDAHOBIT is quite an important, day, particularly because we get to reflect, on the milestones that the LGBTI community has some sort of achieved, while truly reflecting, I think, on the deep-seated challenges that we are still navigating. I think I'm particularly drawn to this year's theme because, of course, the body, for LGBTI people has always been some sort of a site of violence, right? How we experience existence has always been directly proportional to our bodies. So I also do, think, when you then speaking around, is it possible to look at IDAHOBIT as a moment of joy? Like, is it possible for us to imagine queer joy, right, and reflecting on IDAHOBIT? I think also that's a decision. So I think what this theme, at least this year, allows us to do is to some sort of, for the first time, centralize ourselves around this commemoration and say, since the violence is meted out in our bodies, perhaps we could also manufacture joy, from our bodies, or like from our side. So it's almost like taking back space, right? I think the previous themes have always been quite critical, but they've also been quite divorced from us, so it's always been around some sort of a national consciousness, or some sort of a community consciousness. And what I think this year's theme does is to really locate, IDAHOBIT as a personal, as a personal day, and allowing us to some sort of reimagine what a queer identity means for us, and subsequently what our rights mean to us. And yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Mawethu. Our bodies, our lives, our rights. And I think it's really quite important to recognize that and center it within the context of intersectionality. That being said, I'm really happy to request DK to introduce himself and let us know why it's important to commemorate IDAHOBIT.
All right. Hi, everyone. I don't know if I'm audible.
You're very audible. Thanks.
Oh, perfect. All right. So my name is actually DK Dlamini. I identify as a transgender man, and I'm with the Rock of Hope, Eswatini, which is an LGBTI organization that actually strives to create a safe environment, and a very inclusive one for the LGBTI community in country. I think to describe why we actually celebrate or we commemorate IDAHOBIT, for me, it's a simple answer to say we are raising awareness. Raising awareness because of the ills and mistreatments that the LGBTI people face, your stigma, discrimination, harassment. It needs to be known that as marginalized groups, we face such, and every day as activists who are working towards alleviating, these incidences. And with this particular day, it's just again to make known that we have lost LGBTI brothers and sisters in the movement, and we should actually remember them and, not lose hope, even to say that, yes, we're still continuing with the struggle, and then one day, our bodies and our lives will be free, and we shall be, living in a community that is inclusive to all. So thank you.
Thank you so much, DK. I will circle back, over to Wima, and just sort of, situate us within this context. we understand that there's so many different elements that we need to include when programming or when organizing as activists, but we know that sometimes it's not safe. And safeguarding can always be an issue, particularly when we work with different stakeholders. So whether it's with law enforcement or health practitioners, we always find that there's always good intention, but still harm can be done. So how can we, I guess, lighten the burden a little bit of making sure that we can educate where necessary, but then call out where needed?
I really liked what you said about the intentions, because I don't know, I would say from my personal experience, at least, most of the times the intentions are good, but that's what make them make some mistakes when dealing with the queer community. And how to know, make the difference when we need to educate and call them out, it's very, very, very tricky, I would say. And it depends on the people that you are dealing with. It depends on their age. It depends on in a lot of factors. For example, we've been trying to work with doctors here in Tunisia, and we've been trying to provide this kind of very, very simplified trainings on SOGIESC. So the most basic things, like the words that you use, the terms that you're not allowed to use. This is how you can interact with a queer person and so on. But then most of the times we find a lot of difficulties, especially if it's an older doctor saying no, this is my work, I know what I'm doing, you're just a young person, these are some hippie new terms that you want us to use, but whatever the terms that we use is what we've been taught. So you find this this difficulty to tell them that we trust you, we trust your knowledge, you're a doctor, we're not doctors. So in the same sense that we trust what you're doing, you also need to trust us and trust what we're trying to tell you, in a sense. But again, it really depends on the person, if I could say, especially because we look really young, so people would not accept information from us as much as we hope for them to accept these information, or at least have these debates. And most of them would not really want to interact with us until we provide our CVs, in a sense, and tell them, look, this is my experience. I've been working in this field for these number of years. I've been doing this for this number of years. I've got a training from this institution and this institution. And if you give them names of institutions that they know and they trust, that might make the interaction easier with them. But in some cases, even if we really trust their intentions, and even if to a certain level we know that what they meant was not what actually happened, we found ourselves having to call them out and having to tell them, no, what you're doing is wrong. No, I'm gonna tell others about what you're doing. No, I'm gonna use any other means to let people know that what you're doing is wrong. And even though I hate what I'm gonna say now, but it kind of sets the example for other people, which sounds maybe like a punishment or something, but sometimes we find ourselves having to do it to at least show that we hold a sense of power, that we actually can do something, and that we're not just like young people running around trying to change things just because we want them to change, or to change things just because it's trendy. No, this is the reality. This is us. This is the people that exist. This is our issues. These are our problems. And if you do not take us seriously, we can become dangerous, in a sense. So we actually have the power. We just need to know how to use it wisely.
Thank you so much, Rima. Talking agency, talking autonomy, and talking, representation within the context of, these different power dynamics and settings. Really full response to that. And I unfortunately have to release Alex as we get to the airport. But, Alex, just in light of Rima has just shared, what do you think are things that we must stop and do to ensure and protect the rights of young LGBT individuals in development?
Thank you, Dewey. Maybe let me start with what we can do. Then we all go to what we can stop, right? And I think what we can do, to be honest, very simple, but I don't know how simple that would be for every other person, and that would be a question for all of us to think about. What we can do is to just allow youth or queer youth or LGBTQ youth to just live, thrive, in society, and just allow them to create their own spaces, have control of affairs of their lives. And if anything at all, we rather guide and support them in a more progressive manner, not in a way that controls them in any form. And what we can start is to just simply take away all the bottlenecks that we set in place for youth to progress. Bottlenecks in terms of, frustrating youth, just putting in place mechanisms and, the other word that is like mostly used and I'm not always comfortable about, which is simply being having to put in place controls and control in the form of oh goodness, this word isn't coming. Just setting in place control that really push youth out of their involvement and their place and resources that they even try to even create for themselves. And this we've seen on so many occasions from so many different actors, even from the LGBTQ community or organizations or movements itself. And I believe that once we are able to really open ourselves and open space up in a way that isn't restrictive, in a way that isn't oppressive or suppressive of any other person, especially youth, but I'd rather giving them all the necessary resources, I believe it will go a long way to develop youth and their initiative. And guess what? The youth at some point are also going to grow older. And it is with this mindset that would also allow them to also look graciously onto the next generation that is going to come after them, and then also act in good faith towards the next generation. And I believe it is in that light that we will see a holistic progress across board, across the older generation, across the youth, and across every other generation that would come after. So that it also has a trickle-down effect, and that will always have to start from somewhere, and it has to start from us as of now, and being more supportive of youth in a very intentional way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. I'm wishing you safe travels as well. I think, yeah, it's quite important, recognizing that there's an intergenerational lens, recognizing, the institutionalized is important. Now, I'll refer to you, Mawetu, in recognizing that there are controls. Essentially, some of these controls need to speak to safeguarding and making sure that There aren't any loopholes for harm or trigger responses within the context of programming, within the context of research. And so I'm wondering, just your or some of that you have coming from society network perspective, what do you think are the determinants, for succeeding? I think we've just heard what needs to, to stop, what we need to start, but what are the determinants of, essentially strengthening that agency and autonomy that Wima was speaking about, particularly for young activists across the global South?
Hi, Domi. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. I mean, I think inclusion of LGBTI people, inclusion of LGBTI people, inclusion of LGBTI people, inclusion of LGBTI people. I can't stress that enough, right? Because truly programming without LGBTI people is not programming that is going to serve LGBTI people. And we get that a lot of time donors come with certain recommendations in terms of how they foresee this work. And then oftentimes that, those recommendations fall short of the experiences of LGBTI people. And as a result, the programs in themselves fall short in serving, LGBTI people. So, I mean, I think in terms of, even when we think about spatial justice, for LGBTI people, so like, how do we enable environments to ensure that LGBTI work is possible and it's able to thrive? Again, I think, we need to idealize those spaces while including LGBTI people. So like, I mean, I think for me, also in terms of programming. So like organizations cannot ideate on what programming for LGBTI rights will look like without including LGBTI people, right? And so for me, I think like just an inclusion of LGBTI people, and it's not just having one LGBTI person in the team, while the program's team, which consists of 5 people, is not necessarily like LGBTI, because I mean, we also do know how power dynamics happen. And of course, we've seen in the past how LGBTI people have almost been used as fronts when we know that they do not directly affect they do not directly influence policy, because people have already thought through policy. And what they usually do then is to some sort of use then those LGBTI voices as promoters of the policies, as opposed to initiators of the policies. So yeah, I think just let LGBTI people create their own solutions, enable spaces for LGBTI people to convene in order to speak about their own experiences, and subsequently to make sense of those experiences and to create solutions of those experiences. I think I am really, really tired of LGBTI people being sidelined, and the solutions then coming up, and us consistently having to navigate ourselves on public opinion on our lives, right? I think it is very important that we influence public opinion on who we are, and subsequently what we think is a solution to our problem. And of course, this is not to say that communities should not be thinking about solutions against their own microaggressions, or the ways in which they have, sustained patriarchy, which is, crippling LGBTI livelihoods. But I think, in terms of like, our day-to-day, so like when we're thinking about, health, and health and just livelihoods, LGBTI people should be given, space, to speak to what that means for them, and subsequently what, adequate lifestyle or adequate services also translate to them.
Thank you so much, Mawethu, and I really do appreciate that insight. It's really about inclusion. It's really about making sure that there's meaningful participation. I think that's one of the reasons why, for me, it's really it's great, and it's a privilege to be on the board of Accountable Now, where there's clear intention in wanting to advance inclusion, not just in the best practices, but also in considering, membership, and in considering ways of engaging beyond some of the affiliates and networks and partners that they work with. And I think for me, it's then trying to figure out, how do we make it meaningful, especially for those who are in very challenging environments. And I will refer to you, DK. Maybe you can help us, in instances where the law doesn't protect you, in instances where society doesn't even enable one to thrive, never mind just survive. And in instances where, the operating environment for an NGO can be quite challenging, how can we navigate this, element of violence were mentioned on, alluded to by Alex, but also by Mawetu. And more importantly, how do we consistently remind ourselves of the joy and the need to have that celebration, to have rest as a revolution, as per Audre Lorde? How can we, amidst all these variant challenges, ensure that there can be joy despite the structural impediments to our joy?
All right, thank you, Dumi, for that. I think for me, I've always said that it lies with the allies, because yes, we might be in a society or living in a society which literally infringes upon us. I mean, the laws and, society as well has their own perceptions in terms of the LGBTI agenda. But relying on the allies has, for I think in our case, for the longest time, has really helped push the movement and has really made, LGBTI people somehow feel visible in the country context. I'll make an example. When we were first having our pride, the LGBTI pride, we faced, certain inhibitions when we wanted to march in the street. But because we had allyship with the US Embassy, the EU Embassy, it, somehow we're able to break through that barrier, and we were able to have our very first march here in Eswatini back in 2018. So I think, yes, it does lie with the allies at times, because I always say this: if you have someone in office who does really see the movement, or who does really recognize LGBTI people, then they can really take you one step further into being recognized or, being listened to. Because again, inclusivity comes with recognizing that people exist, but then again, having them, speak out and getting to acknowledge that their voice has to be heard in that particular situation.
Thank you so much, DK, for sharing the Eswatini experience. And then sort of inclined to ask Wima, if there is a more gendered lens and beyond just the gendered lenses, and recognizing, for folks beyond the binaries, some of the issues that exist and that there, where you recognize that some of the wins, if I can share with our own context in Botswana, so the win will be, decriminalization of same-sex intimacy, but we're forgetting that trans and gender diverse individuals are left in the context of equality. So one example is the fact that, one individual to change their gender marker on the national ID card or identity card would mean that they have to go to court. And so going to the high court means that you need a lawyer and you need the backing of, an institution. And not everyone would be able to, turn to foreign embassies or other institutions to help them assert their rights and essentially their identity, because that can have an impact on how you're job and how you receive service delivery, services, or even, trying to open a bank account. And so within this context, and I guess within the Tunisian context, if maybe you could share, from a gender lens, what then that looks like in the context of trying to seek joy amidst all this violence and amidst all these structural impediments to meaningful participation.
Well, it is a bit of personal, sensitive subject, because in Tunisia, to begin with, we trans people cannot have reconfirming gender operations. We do not have that. You cannot change your documents. You cannot have any operation if you want to. You cannot even take hormones. But still, we have a lot of people doing that. The risk is that since this is illegal, it's not safe, because you'll be taking hormones or doing anything in an environment that's not controlled, that's not that not everybody has access to say if it is really that safe or not. So that's already out of the scenario. We cannot do that. And to talking about non-binary people, it's even more complicated, because you will face kind of people getting you out of the picture from non-queer people, but even in the queer community and the transgender community, to be more specific, most of the people will say if you're non-binary, that doesn't mean you're trans, that you have to pick either you're trans man or trans woman. Non-binary, like most of the people here, they will not consider that as being part of the transgender umbrella of the transgender community. So there's more problems, more issues, and kind of finding yourself out of the picture, even in your own community, if we could say that. Still, people are very strong. We have a lot of trans people in Tunisia. Like, the community is growing even more, especially the younger generations. Again, I always say hi. Thank you for being this brave. Thank you for being braver than us. Thank you for being braver than the generations before us. Because the younger generations, they honestly, they don't give an F. They will do whatever they want. They will dress the way they want. They will express their gender any way they want, but they will have to go through the brutality of police. They will have to go through the judgment in the streets, working place, and universities, like in all public places, if we could say so. And even if someone decides to go through the operation, if a transgender person decides to go through the operation either in Tunisia or abroad, they will not be considered, they will not use their right gender. They will not, people will not use the pronouns or the gender they identify as. And even if they get stopped by the police, they will be like a lot of issues telling them maybe this is the identity of someone else, who's this person. They would not believe them, and they will face a lot of issues, which is unfortunately is making people flee the country, which is very, very sad, if I could say so, because people have a lot of potential. People could have been active citizens. They could have done a lot of huge change in their own country, in Tunisia, but finding themselves having to face all of these problems, all of these issues, it's very understandable for them to find themselves in a situation where they have to leave, where they have to look for a safer country, for a safer environment. But then again, even if they leave, and even after leaving, going to another country and not being a citizen of that country will make them face other issues, will make them go through other problems that they didn't face in their home country, like facing racism, facing a lot of hate, which puts them in kind of a fragile situation, especially when most of the people, they do not understand, and they think those who decide to leave, they have the luxury lifestyle, but that's not the case. Because personally, I work on the queer asylum project, and I hear a lot of stories. Most of the people who leave, they do not want to leave because this is their, even if they're not really safe, but they have a safe system. They have friends, and they have people that they could rely on. Then they found themselves in an entirely different environment, having to recreate that safe place again, and having to go through a lot of other issues. So I'll stop here because I don't want to for this panel to get a bit dark and a bit sad. I really want for people to realize that there are a lot of unspoken realities that many people go through. There are a lot of unspoken hardships that people have to face, and not because they left their country, not because they left their home country, it means they took the easiest solutions. Most of the case, it is the only solution that they actually have.
I think Dumi just got kicked out. While we're waiting for Dumi, I mean, I would perhaps, like to jump because I mean, I really am also, I mean, it's a bit of a sad one. I mean, already we're not trying to dump in the panel or make it, or make this conversation a bit sad, but like, I am also like from the same school of thought that sometimes in thinking through our joy is deeply connected to our resistance, right? And you know, our joy is deeply connected to the way in which we make sense of our own pain. And our joy is deeply connected, you know, to our protest. So I don't think, you know, joy is necessarily, you know, this outer thing, you know, that exists in the world for us. Because I mean, of course, we know that the world is engineered and architected to some sort of, you know, consistently sideline us. But like I have, for me, imagined or have felt the presence of queer joy when I have been with kinfolks, you know, who know that, you know, any moment is almost the last moment. But, you know, we are no longer crying, you know, in those moments, but we're making sense in those moments as a way of keeping each other alive, or as a way of, you know, of surviving. And I mean, I speak a lot, you know, with Dumi, you know, around this in terms of like, what does it mean to exist in the world, or like even to start imagining radical rest, right? When the body is so central in navigating this work, right? Unlike any other human rights kind of work, which doesn't require, you know, kind of the body. LGBTI rights work is deeply personal and is deeply dependent on us being able to do it, right? And nobody can be able to do it. So unfortunately, we also do not have the privilege, right, of being absent or sometimes resting in order to allow the work to continue. So we've had to, we literally are consistently creating alchemy, right? I feel like this work is the consistent work of turning base into gold, and sometimes that gold doesn't have to be conventional gold, but like when we are able to pass on a recommendation, or we're able to see an LGBTI thematic being reflected on a particular policy document, that has become joy. But when we know that an LGBTI activist has been released, you know, that is a moment of joy for us. And of course, this joy doesn't seem as light, you know, as other kinds of joy, but it is still joy for us, because this is a way in which we know that we are surviving, you know, and I mean, unfortunately, I think also like in terms of like thinking about queer futures, there's no promise of a better world, right? I mean, we've seen what the COVID pandemic really did, right? With governments really clamping down on civic space, and particularly the space for LGBTI, you know, defenders. And, you know, we're also seeing that, you know, in as much as most countries are transitioning out of, you know, the COVID pandemic, or at least the state of disaster management, some of those laws that were implemented are still there. And what we know is that it's going to be very difficult, right, for LGBTI rights defenders to some sort of rid themselves of the state of disaster management, you know, rules or regulations, right? So like, again, like, I don't want to come across as pessimistic, but I do think like we need to have a different relationship with failure, right? And particularly the ways in which policy tells us we are failing, right? We need to have a different idea or relationship with success, or at least the ways in which we are defining success, you know, as the LGBTI community, because it won't look like, common success anytime soon. Thank you so much, Dumi. I was just really holding space for you. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Mawethu. I really appreciate it. I mean, isn't it weird? I am in New York and somehow internet can fail me. I mean, it's the most confusing thing that will ever, you know, happen for me. That being said, Wima, you had your hand up, so please go ahead.
No, I wanted to say, because they said that they didn't want to sound pessimistic, but that actually sounded very optimistic. Like having to deal with like looking at our failure differently. I think that's actually a really, really good advice. Like, yeah, it was not pessimistic. That's just what I wanted to say. I actually really loved it.
And I think that's important, right? And it's beautiful, you know. And I mean, there's there's always a sense of urgency because a lot of the issues that we're dealing with are very tangible. Like we feel them, we experience them, we have to navigate them. Unlike many instances where, social justice issues have been theorized, or where, in other instances, it's deemed as a best practice or a scenario for us to sort of try and figure out. And so I'm then, going to sort of refer to DK and then ask, how can we sort of humanize not just our movements, because I'm recognizing that there can be different conflicts, right? Where you find we've got, TERFs, trans exclusionary feminists, where we've got competition in lieu of collaboration when folks have to apply for grants. So, we know that that competition often comes with, civil society politics, especially when we're looking at queer organizations versus, mainstream organizations. But I think more importantly, as, Mawetu was just, alluding, the restricted civic space, even with draconian laws and regulations that, sort of impede us from being meaningful and effective. And I think, even Alex alluded to, some of these issues around controls, where it takes a little bit of our time, a little bit of our energy to focus on those issues without necessarily countering, the religious right, without countering the conservatives, without countering the anti-gender ideology, who seem to have quite a bit of impact across, the social justice spectrum, including reproductive rights, including LGBT rights, and the broader human rights framework. So in your opinion, what do you think are the entry points, I think? What are the entry points for making sure that we're able to really, be comfortable in that failure, be comfortable in that impact? Because, in many instances, one can be frustrated that, we're in a project for 12 months and we haven't achieved what we thought we'd achieve, decriminalizing a law or making sure that, something is enacted. And that's largely because of the funding that we receive that is quite linear and limited. What's your perspective within this complexity in making sure that we're still kind to ourselves in what we feel we have achieved? Because I think existence is resistance, but it doesn't seem so for many enablers and many individuals who hold power even within our own movement, funding, value chain.
All right, thank you for that very, very long and extensive question. Right. Okay, I guess for me, you mentioned something about politics, which I captured, within the LGBTI space, CSO space, actually. I think with that, as, the LGBTI activists actually working in the different, sectors or spectrums of the LGBTI cascade, I think it's just then to sit down and literally think that before you're an LGBTI person, you are a human being. And I guess that's where we start. And then by taking that, that is how then we get to inform the particular projects that we work in. Because I think for the longest time, lesbians, for instance, have said that, they felt left out in the movement. How so? Because when it comes to SRHR, literally there's nothing provided to them besides psychosocial support, right? So by taking this and understanding that before we are LGBTI identifying, if I'd put it that way, we are human. And by so then we can get to influence the certain projects that we work in. From a human perspective. And again, I'll say this because I'm currently, again, working with the EU in terms of a project called Out and Proud. And then what we have done with that is to say that we don't want to just focus on people's SRH rights, but let's focus holistically on the individual that we have to aid here, or we have to support, if I put it that way. So there are legal components that get involved. We have the religious aspect of it. The psychosocial, yes, fine. But, we've literally summed up, or we've literally tried by all means that let this be a holistic, and inclusive type of response. And I don't know, maybe you might repeat the other avenue of the question because it is quite a long way.
Yeah, so I think, it's really about making, because I think, in some instances we found that, seeking justice, as an example, can be deemed as a success. So we managed to get a case in court, we managed to get it registered, and then someone found some form of redress. But what is justice if you can't go back home, if you can't be able to be comfortable in the context of your lifestyle, cultural practice, religious practice, because now it's taboo that you challenged an adult, that you took the breadwinner to court for injustice. So is that really justice within the context of someone's life or within the context of a funder or enabler?
Yeah, definitely. You're mentioning quite a very important point, because I think this is something that we've been having as well in country, to say, yes, we want, you know, the law actually to be repealed in terms of the 1907 common law. And again, we still ask ourselves, will the stigma or discrimination actually disappear from that? Will LGBTI people now feel safe or better at home? But then again, I feel when you actually speak to the LGBTI community, and because we've been having a lot of discussions with them, and they will mention that through the mere existence of the law itself, then now it just trickles down into everything else. Because, for instance, I'll mention that a lot of people here in country feel as though as LGBTI people, we are somehow illegal. But when you try to interpret the common law of sodomy, it literally criminalizes the sexual act and not really the individual now. So in people's perceptions, through that existence of that particular law, then they feel as though now they have the power or the mandate to then stigmatize and discriminate on the LGBTI people. So I feel as though we shouldn't just focus merely on the law, but then do what I would say a more comprehensive type of activism, whereby as we are then putting or actually advocating in the courts, but then let's do something on the ground in terms of the social perspectives. Let's amp up the SOGIES advocacy. Let's amp up probably international advocacy as well through your UN shadow reports, such that when it all comes together, it literally aligns and it doesn't just look at one aspect, but leaves out the other aspects of that particular human being.
I think that even sort of addresses intersectionality, because you're talking about a multifaceted approach, a holistic approach to really making sure that, LGBT individuals, Africans, can be liberated. I think one thing that you mentioned, you reminded me of how, these colonial remnants are still quite in existence, and, a few of us who are speaking are obviously speaking from a common law perspective. But I think, North Africa, looking at MENA as a region in itself and as a development praxis is always a bit elusive, right? You find that some funders and even programming will only say, Sub-Saharan Africa, and then there's North Africa. And then, it's often quite separate and quite distinct. Would you be able, Wima, to share with us why you think that distinction needs to be there, and maybe more importantly, why it shouldn't be there within a decolonial framing, especially in Africa's context?
Yes, thank you so much. I really love this question, and I really enjoy talking about this subject. Okay, to begin with, I do not agree with the MENA division. I do not agree with it at all, because if we take North Africa and the Middle East, there is nothing in common with us, honestly. Talking about history, talking about even the language. Most people will say, oh, you all speak Arabic. That's not true. We all have different dialects. If we meet in the same place and we all speak Arabic, each country with their own dialects, the North African, we will understand each other, but we will not understand what the others are saying, and the same way they will not understand what we're saying. So language, history, realities, I don't know, I can name all of them. We really have nothing in common. And it really pains me a lot personally when I find myself in spaces, and those spaces are supposed to get us to come together, and I'll find people who are not from Africa, of course, who are not from the MENA region, who have no idea about us, who have no idea about our realities and our history, telling me that no, I cannot be with the African group because I have to be with the MENA group. I'm like, but I am from Africa. I get it, there are some differences, but these differences are really, really minor compared to the differences that we have with the Middle Eastern countries. And it gets me super, super angry, honestly, when these, when these white people would be like, no, you don't belong in the African division. I'm like, what do you know? How do you, like, who are you exactly to tell me where my place is and where I belong, and who to share these stories, these experiences, these realities with? Like, you cannot be the person to dictate or tell me where I can go. And I remember like 2 years ago, this idea was like really hunting me, and I went and I did a lot of research. And of course, I know this might come, this is not a surprise, but it was the UN who actually made this division, who actually put these categories. I'm just wondering, like, what was the plan behind having these groups specifically in this way, and specifically in this, like, with these very specifications? Because personally, to me, I would say it does not make sense. And I would say it's more of a political thing, more than it being in talking about inclusion and belonging in a sense. So I hope we get to eliminate it one day, if we could. We have a lot of things to work on, but this is one of the things that I personally keep thinking about all the time. And it also makes me super, super happy when I find myself like sharing space with you, sharing space with people that I know that I belong with, more than other groups where I know I will be quiet, and I will not be able to relate to them. Like, I will not be able to find anything really like deep things in common that I could talk about, that I could relate to and be like, yeah, I know what you're talking about, and this and this and that. Because Africa, we're together, we're in this together. So I really wish we could change that in the future. North African countries, I will get to, if we talk about saying North Africa as a division, as a group, North, East, West, South, it makes sense to me. But saying no, the MENA, and including us with the region, that no, it's a big no-no from me anyways.
Thank you so much, Rima. And I think that's, it's important to have that conversation within a decolonial framing, and recognizing, that the instruments of the powers that be is divide and conquer, right? And that's how they've always thrived, and it made sense for them, but maybe it doesn't make sense for us, right?
Exactly.
And it's just, you just actually reminded me of, how it's easier for me to go to Europe than it is to go to West Africa, for example. That in some instances I have to connect in Brussels, to go to another African country. But that says quite a lot as to why maybe some of these colonial elements are still quite in existence, but also more importantly, when you're looking at, some of the justifications. So some will say it's economic trade, some will say, it's, certain forms of capital that are flowing. And so that means it makes sense for those flight routes to go that direction. But I'm really now, and maybe then let me refer to you, Mawetu, is how do we tackle this very invisible, very structured, and very clear system that is not built for the BIPOC body, right? The Black, Indigenous person of color. This system and world that often thrives off of merit, professionalism, so an element of policing and morality, because we see that not just in how people speak about laws, we see that in how people speak about, how we must go to the office, or even at immigration checks, especially, when they happen to be very transphobic. So from your perspective, in this world of persistently invisible, and I guess it can be quite exhausting when I'm thinking about it, but how can we be navigating this space and still be queer and still seek refuge and rest? Because I think sometimes we sit and we feel overwhelmed, and sometimes we sit and we can't think, oh my goodness, the world might end. If the world doesn't end, it's still there to discriminate against me. And if that's not discriminating against me, then I have to be very careful at home, because I'm probably going to get a few Bible verses in the morning. And, when I get to work, the workplace or a government office, then I still have to over-explain myself by coming out 5 times. So how can we be able to sort of navigate these complexities that are deeply nuanced, deeply invisible, and that we have to educate many people about, but still find joy and still find happiness and still find rest and still, be of sane mind, of sound mind, if I can say that.
I mean, I'm not sure if I am the correct person to even be attempting with this, right? Because I mean, of my own intersections and how those cripple me, or at least cripple the ways in which, I think can exist in the world. And I mean, we speak a lot about this again. I mean, yeah, I mean, I definitely do not think I'm the correct person. I mean, here am I, sure, African, non-binary, Black, and based in the south part of Africa. But what does that mean? In a real sense, right? Considering that even in country, there's so many inequalities, right? That are just not based on those intersections that I've just sort of mentioned. I do not know how to propose for our bodies to not be regulated, right? Because unfortunately, I come into queerness, or I'm born into queerness already within those regulations. There's no elements of freedom that I know that do not exist within the binds of me wanting to breathe, right? My entire conception of freedom has been wanting to exist and be alive, right? And some sort, freedom has always been some sort of a far-fetched thing because it's never guaranteed, right? So like my most immediate needs have just been like breathing, to be seen, to be able to laugh authentically, to be able to be recognized authentically, or to be part of a community, that authentically sees me. And this is, I think, so like even like thinking around how do we work around the deregulation of the queer body seems like even like a more far-fetched step. So to be honest, I do not know how to make freedom here, right? All I know is how to make community here. I know how to hold a queer kinfolk into existing for another day, but I cannot promise them of freedom because that's something I cannot conceptualize. I do not know white monopoly capital, because that is my daily struggle. I am navigating white monopoly capital. And in as much as I might be politicized and might be decolonial in the ways in which I think of the world, but I also have to acknowledge that the institutions that we exist in are in one way or the other, maintaining the status quo. They exist, right? According to certain binds, or at least they regulate this work. So it's almost like consistently existing in a state of unfreedom, right? But that state of unfreedom sometimes is the closest thing we get, closer to freedom. So I guess I do not know how to answer this question without being philosophical, right? In a sense, because I mean, most of the ideas that at least one thinks about, particularly when imagining what queer freedom would look like, unfortunately, things that my mind struggles to grapple with because I have no reference of what that looks like. So, I mean, of course, we speak a lot around existing as some sort of this resistance, but, I'm also not gonna, be blindsided to the idea that, with the rising mental health, disorders within, the LGBTI community, sometimes existing is not resistance, sometimes, right? And for those who have died as a way of resisting, I have also had to some sort of pay homage, to them. So like, yeah, I'm sorry, Jimmy, I don't think I can give you like a quite an articulate, response in a sense, because I am literally tiltating, like there's things I know about the world, but there's things that queerness reminds me I will never attain of the world. And not that queerness is this miserable thing, because I mean, truly, we have found moment of solitude and joy. We have laughed like we have never before. we have written beautiful poetry, you know, out of this miserable existence, and sometimes not just a miserable existence, because we have fought to be here and to exist in the ways in which we have. There's beauty in us existing as deviant, right? In us existing as things that have never been imagined before. So like in us existing as our ancestors' wildest, you know, dream in a sense. But beyond that, I do not know. I do not know how do we deregulate, or like what processes do we need to undergo, you know, under the deregulation of the queer. But and I think, of course, you know, policy has been quite important. And I think, you know, I work within the advocacy space, and particularly, you know, within the LGBTI advocacy space. And I mean, I really commend the actions towards ensuring that civic space for LGBTI people, you know, is some sort of more open. And this, you know, is around ensuring that LGBTI groups are able to associate, but they're able to freely assemble, and they're able to freely express. But I also do want to say, within, you know, those different freedoms, there's also limitations, you know, that are very specific, you know, to LGBTI people. So civil society is willing to support a certain freedom, and, you know, at the same time, it's willing to restrict a certain freedom. So it's like really existing within the zone of, you know, unfreedom and freedom. I'm sorry, that wasn't very conclusive, but I hope you make something out of that.
Thank you so much, Maweche. I think that's important. I mean, we're never conclusive. There's never an end to our existence and our beauty, right? And so I think that's the whole point. And I think, you know, you really elucidated, you know, the importance of recognizing that there are folks who have resisted through taking their own lives, and that has been a statement in itself. I mean, just looking at the Arab Spring and how it was triggered, you know, in the context of Tunisia and someone burning themselves in front of a government building. Never mind that, but just looking at individuals who've taken their own lives, in recognizing that there's so much structural violence and that they cannot continue, you know, to find themselves in this world that, you know, they're told you must aspire and they're told that you must have dreams, but they're consistently reminded that they're not worthy for any opportunities to fulfill those dreams. Then they're reminded that they're criminalized and that, you know, they're basically arbitrarily jailed, and they're finding themselves in situations of indignity and inhumanity, even in safe spaces such as homes and the intimacy of relationships. And so I think, you know, it's in this complexity that I'm realizing that it's not black and white in the context of queerness, in the context of safeguarding, and in the context of even our own laws. You know, the last 2 days of last week, we were having an SRHR dialogue with parliamentarians, and, you know, with a lot of the things that were being said, I just sort of reminded myself that, firstly, you know, the law and the policy that they speak about isn't necessarily there in the room when there is violence being meted out. That's one. And then secondly, that, you know, someone can speak about, you know, economic inclusion, but it doesn't mean anything if I've got nothing on the table, you know, because these are just the disparities that continue to exist and persist. And so I am led to sort of wonder if, you know, amidst all this complexity, that we can truly meaningfully sustain ourselves despite knowing that the world isn't really there to sustain it, and that there's no need to answer that question, but it's important to hold and to arrest it, because sometimes the answer might lie, you know, when we're taking a shower, when we're driving down, or even having some form of rest. So one of the questions that did come through before or upon registration, and I will ask you, Wima, is how has it been difficult to translate the terms used when addressing LGBTIQ in local terms without being seen as derogatory? And I mean, if looking at my own context, some of the language can be quite questionable. In fact, we can't say it in front of the elderly. So I'm wondering if it's the same, you know, in Tunisia and in South Africa. So maybe Wima, please go first.
Yeah, so basically the Tunisian context is similar to the general context. If we speak about the queer term, queer word, you know, that before it was used like with a bad meaning as a derogatory word, and then the queer community proclaimed that word. So in a sense, it is kind of very similar, that we have a lot of Tunisian words and their meanings are really, really bad, even when saying it in front of older people, like you said. But the queer community, the Tunisian queer community, are working towards proclaiming those words, even though this will take a lot of time because their original meaning is not the same as how we are using it now. But it is also very, very needed to have our own vocabulary, our own words in our own language. Because most of the time when we're talking and we use like the word queer, you cannot translate it to Arabic, for example. We do not have a word for that. So we just use the same word in Arabic saying queer, like just Arabic, like making the word in Arabic. And most of the time get a lot of comments saying, oh, it's not something from our culture, it's not something common to us. Since we do not have words for it, it means it's not right, correct? So they'll be like, you cannot even use a word in Arabic that's ours, which means it doesn't make sense that you exist in this country, in this context. And that's why we're trying to have words of our own, even if we have to make them up. That's how language evolve. I mean, that's how it works. So it's a bit complicated. We have the words that the very old words that are being used in the wrong way, in the wrong context, but we're trying to proclaim those words. And we're also trying to come up with other words because the community is so diverse, which is amazing. But in the same way, we need to name things by their names. We need to use the right words. We need to describe things in the right way, which is like a work that started years ago and is going to continue for years to come. But slowly we're getting there. Slowly we're finding our own terms, and most importantly, we're making our own vocabulary, our own language, in the best way possible, so that we can use it without getting any hate or any comments or any feedback telling us that we cannot use those words or they don't understand what we're talking about. So we will get there slowly.
Thank you very much, Wima. I see Mawetu might have just dropped off. Eskom is really quite an issue, their main electricity provider. So I think then I will just refer to the second, or rather the third question that had been asked, because the second one is to Nigeria. So in this context, do you think queer Africans, what do you think is needed in the context of Africa, right? And you've mentioned certain elements that have always been absolved or removed from our queerness, in that, we're an African, right? And so in the spirit of this reclaiming, not just language, but also occupying space, and what that possibly looks like, I think then the question here is, where are the avenues, or where do you think are the strategic points for us to advance our liberation beyond just, public health, beyond just strategic litigation? Are there other sort of development issues or mechanisms or spaces or avenues for creativity that you feel like we really should be foraying into that space, so that possibly, in 5 years or whatever, we can have more queer African movies or more queer African songs and industries and theater and just a lot of queer joy?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. My answer is everywhere. Like occupying all the places. We don't have to pick and choose. Honestly, the more the better. So anywhere where we can, like, I don't know, be there, let's be there. I wouldn't pick a place. But talking about art is very, very important, and media, because representation. Even some of the movies that are out there, they might tackle the queer issues in Africa, but they always show it in such a bad way, if I could say, like, oh, the poor victims, or look at them. I'm like, okay, we know the issues that we're facing, we know what we're going through, but at the same time, like, there is a lot of resistance, there are a lot of power that we hold, there's a lot of work that's being done. So maybe we should show that too, that we are super.
Thank you. So, oh my goodness, is it my internet or it's Wima's?
Yeah, it's my internet, sorry.
Okay, thank you, thank you. I mean, yeah, I mean, you never know, but I mean, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you spending the time sharing insights. I don't have any comments. I don't have any hands on the call. So that being said, I would really love to thank Wima, Alex, DK, and Mawetu for having shared their insights. It has really been amazing. Thank you to Accountable Now. Thank you to LGBT Rights Africa. Thank you to, how do I pronounce your organization, Mao? How is it pronounced?
موجودين, which means we exist in Arabic.
Oh, yes, Maujudin. Thank you so much.
We do exist.
Yeah, exactly. For availing, yourself, as well as Youth Excel for bringing in DK. That being said, we'll be having a two-part, podcast recording with other participants in partnership with Voice Global and Youth Voices Count in commemoration of IDAHOBIT. And then I will then maybe leave it to Hector to maybe just give us final parting shots. And yeah, any additional details or resources to be shared. Oh, okay. Hector, I think you're on mute or earphones.
Sorry, the micro. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to you, Dumi, and the rest of the speakers. It's been a really pleasure to host this webinar. And just to mention as well that the recording will be published in our website in the same webpage as you found the details to join the session and the preparations. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your time and being with us in commemorating IDAHOBIT. Goodbye.